Welcome back to the Dementia Collective, the podcast where we explore powerful stories and fresh ideas shaping the future of dementia care. If you're new here, I'm Andrew Karesa. I'm a caregiver, a researcher, and the founder of BlueBell Village. I created this space because I know firsthand what it's like to walk the dementia caregiving journey. I know what it's like to feel lost, overwhelmed, and alone, but I also know the strength that comes from connection. Each episode, we dive into people, tools, and innovations that are helping caregivers find their footing and their voice. Our mission here, to make dementia care more personal, more connected, and more grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing. The importance is ensuring every caregiver feels seen, heard, and supported. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Rebekah Churchyard, founder of Green Care Farms. Rebekah is a social worker, project manager, and psychotherapist. As a tribute to her grandparents, Rebekah founded Green Care Farms, Inc. in 2021, located in Halton Hills, Milton, Ontario. Her work as CEO of Green Care Farms delivers the first ever nature-based program in Canada for people with dementia on an operational farm. She is committed to changing the landscape of care in Canada by supporting other Canadians to open more care farms. Rebekah also currently works in a direct service role in specialized geriatrics healthcare. Prior to this, while living in Toronto, Rebekah gained extensive volunteer experience in charitable board governance and municipal policy. She served as president and vice president with the Toronto Council on Aging Board of Directors and as an accountability table member with the City of Toronto Senior Strategy. In 2024, Rebekah won both the Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest Woman of the Year Award in the Entrepreneur Under 40 category, as well as the Ontario Association of Social Workers Inspirational Leader of the Year Award. Now, residing in Guelph, Ontario, Rebekah is happily dedicated to serving older adults, making the world a better place to grow old. Rebekah, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I look forward to hearing about the Green Care Farm idea. Really, we've talked a lot about urban supports and urban ways of caring. So kind of flipping the table and looking at rural is going to be a good paradigm shift for us.
Yeah, I'm here for it. And I think I always remind people that maybe you didn't grow up on a farm, maybe your parents didn't, but there's a really good chance that your grandparents might have, or at least more connected to the production of food and agriculture. So it's in all of us.
Absolutely. So what inspired you to connect farming with dementia care?
For me, it was really watching my grandparents' journey with dementia. So my grandpa was diagnosed fairly young. He was 63 when he was diagnosed. He was still very physically, functionally intact and loved working outdoors. He loved to work outside. That was his absolute favorite thing to do. Would do it from sunup to sundown. And with his diagnosis, he wasn't really able to do that safely anymore. And a lot of that desire kind of fell on my grandma, which became really hard for her to manage safely. He required full supervision. So what we saw was a real gap in the available programs and services of opportunities for people with dementia to be outside with support. So he had some paid caregivers come in, and maybe they weren't always comfortable going outside or chopping wood with him, which I can totally understand may not be a comfortable thing for some people if they're kind of walking into a respite situation. And on the kind of more system side, there weren't any programs or services where he could be connected with nature in a group setting and supportive of his dementia. So then my grandma was kind of left with the brunt of all of it, and with him.
Did they live in the city or were they in a rural location?
They live in Bellwood, Ontario. For anyone who knows about Ontario, that's close to Fergus, just off of Highway 6, about a half hour from Guelph. And they had a Christmas tree farm, so Bellwood Valley Christmas Tree Farm. And my grandpa also started the first agriculture and horticulture program at Fergus High School. So he was a teacher. On the off season, he did his Christmas tree farm, and during the school year, he taught high school. They started the greenhouse and outdoor education programs and those sorts of things. So being outside in connection with nature was so much more than just a hobby, right? It was really a part of who he was. It was a core part of who he was. And so it was challenging to see that just go neglected because of his diagnosis. We couldn't seem to find our way around that. And that's what had me connecting. Well, surely someone out there has got to have figured this out. And so in my master's of social work and gerontology, I started kind of dabbling into this, looking for material, looking for information. And I came across Dr. Simone de Bruin, who is one of the most prominent researchers in the Netherlands on care farming.
So is that where it's from? The idea of green care farms is from the Netherlands?
For my business, Green Care Farms, yes, that's where it's from. The concept of care farming, social farming is much, much bigger than just what I run, which is it's a day program for respite. It exists on a continuum all the way from events or workshops or one-offs all the way to 24/7 living facility. Any of the accommodations within there, so that short-term respite, overnight stay, those sorts of things, they all can be care farming offerings. Many other countries in the world have figured this out where we haven't. So there are all kinds of different types of care farms. There are care farms for different populations. So what I'm going to talk about today, what I do is a program for people with dementia. But a care farm can exist and can be therapeutic, recreational, and meaningful for many different types of people. People who are living with intellectual disabilities or differences, people who have psychiatric diagnoses, people who maybe have been homeless or incarcerated. For many of those folks, a care farm is an intervention where they can build skills to re-enter the workforce. For my folks with dementia and some other different populations, our goal is never re-entry into the workforce. We're not looking to add lines on their resume, but we are looking to provide them with a safe and supportive setting so that they can have a meaningful, productive day, preferably doing things that they like to do. So someone like my grandpa, that's a good day for him. A good day's work outside, doing something productive on the farm. And we're not expecting him to get a job. Does that make sense? The definition of care farming is so much more broad than what I provide as green care farms. I think just being so new in Canada and having not very many examples, it's important to highlight that there are many different types of care farms.
I think that's important though, because if the point of these supports are to connect people with, something they experience, something that they know, something they connect with, there shouldn't necessarily be one exclusive approach. I think there's value in diversity in it. Maybe navigating tree growth is one, maybe picking berries is another way. I think that if depending
Totally.
on what you are and where you're from, the people living in Kelowna are going to have a fundamentally different experience than people living in Fort McMurray, right?
Very true. And the common denominators of what makes a good program, right? What's a good environment to have a program in? They're pretty similar. So the type of care farming intervention or program that you have for maybe a population with intellectual developmental differences is going to be pretty similar to the programming that you have for someone with dementia. So I think in our time together, we're going to talk about, how to start care farms, or if people are thinking about starting care farms. And one of the things that I talk about with folks is that you can offer a care farming intervention or program for different populations in different cohorts. That's a possibility. We can talk about that more later if you want, or I can expand on that now if you like, whatever you want.
Sure. Why don't you expand on it now?
Yeah. So, for instance, I just listed some of the populations that a care farm intervention could be helpful for. So, sometimes people who take my course, How to Start a Care Farm in Canada, sometimes when they take that, they're thinking, okay, does that mean that I have somebody who has Down syndrome and they're working alongside someone with dementia? And that could be a beautiful relationship. When it comes to the actual programming, how you're going to hire staffing for that, do the safety parameters for the program, it could be difficult in execution, not impossible. But what I would suggest to people is that they can plan in cohorts. So whether that's, Monday is the program for people with dementia, Tuesday is the program for people with intellectual disabilities or differences, and on Thursdays we have an occasional women who are getting into work who maybe have a history with psychiatric illness or mental health concerns. That's how you can provide a diversity of programming using the same therapeutic elements of the care farming environment. So you got the same sensory garden, the same farm. We'll use our example, the same fruit and vegetable, pick your own farm that you're having the programs in, but different populations are being supported. So the elements of the program, the therapeutic elements of the program, you're outside. You see blue skies, green fields. You're surrounded by trees, hearing birds all the time, sun on your face. All three of these different populations are going to experience those elements in their program. They'll experience supportive, warm, caring staff. They'll experience the day where they have an opportunity to be responsible for tasks and where they have a meaningful engagement in their community. So those are some of the common denominators in the programming. Well, the people in the cohort might be quite different. So that's where, as an administrator and operator, you look at, well, who am I hiring to do these things? And what kind of skills, qualifications, or training would they have to support these individuals, this individual population? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is your care farm right now on your family's property that was the Christmas tree farm?
I wish it was. No, it's not. And I have a partnership agreement with the farm that we have. We have a gorgeous partnership with Andrew's Farm Market and Winery, and they've been with us the whole 5 years, and it's been awesome. And one of the other things that I educate people on is that you do not have to own a farm to run a care farm. We need a diversity of models. We need a diversity of partnerships and agreements between landowners and people who are going to run care farms. However, our satellite location, the second care farm for people with dementia in Canada, Meaford Green Care Farms, they're property owners. And that is much more typical of what you see in the Netherlands. I talk about the Netherlands a lot because that's kind of where I formed all of my programming and modeling on. And so what we see as a typical setup is a couple, a heterogeneous couple, so a man and wife who own the property, and then they run a care farm themselves. So they're owner and operators of the property and the care farm. That's typical of what you see. It's not every single model or arrangement. But I think in Canada, we need it all. We need all the types of care farming.
What other kind of care farms are there globally? Like when we look at other regions, is there Asian care farms? Like, do they do things a
Yeah.
little bit different? What about South American? Like, what does it look like in other regions? How are they same and different?
Totally. Japanese, South Korea, I'm pretty sure, I can fact check this afterwards or get you the proper language, but I'm pretty sure that South Korea is the country that has policy in social care farming into their agricultural act. So they actually have a piece of policy that indicates that agricultural land, farmland, has to be used in a social or care farming, mental health supportive way. So that connection, it's one of the only pieces of legislation that I'm aware of, but of course, like all the different languages, I'm sure I'm not getting all the information all the time, but it's one of the only pieces of policy that I'm aware of that kind of connects those two or supports those two. So our broader system isn't always great at supporting these types of initiatives. Yeah, so South Korea obviously has done some work there. I know Japan has as well. And you're also looking at very different approaches culturally to aging, right? I know you know about this. So there are many other communities and cultures around the world who just have a much more understanding, natural, and compassionate view towards our older adults. And that is inherent in the services that they provide. Whereas I feel in Canada and North America, no one's fault. It's just kind of where we are, that we've arrived to this place where we're sort of institutionalizing aging and we're disenfranchised from a lot of those personal care relationships that can be really powerful, natural, and beautiful. So I think from the care farming arrangements that I've seen, they're much more informal, they're much more community based, and it's it's a much more accepted or common practice to find something that grandma or grandpa like to do during their day than kind of be totally burdened and overwhelmed by it. It's a respectful gesture to do that. Does that make sense? I hope I'm
Yeah.
making sense.
No, I think you're making sense, and it seems like you're on the leading edge of this idea. When you think about green care farms and the legacy that your creation of this green care farm in Ontario is having, can you talk about the influence that your grandfather had and what that impacted you in the process of considering aging, purpose, care?
Yeah, I think for sure. I'll explain a little bit about my grandpa's influence, but I can't talk about my grandpa without talking about my grandma. So I think, although I had a relationship with my grandpa was fairly old school. We didn't have tons of meaningful conversations. He was outside working a lot. He wasn't really around the kids a whole bunch, right? Like he was a businessman, which is where I think I draw or relate to him. Is that I'd always seen him in a professional context, doing business, being very, very busy and productive most of the time, as well as an entrepreneur. And seeing an example of those aspects of his identity are integral to who I am today because it's reassuring. Okay, I'm doing those things too. It's in my blood, right? I can do that too. But I think probably the more impactful component of him is my relationship with my grandma and her role as a caregiver. So my grandma was my best friend and we talked all the time. So when I started university and was studying psychology and gerontology, my grandpa was just going through the steps to get his diagnosis. And then, of course, as every family knows, you adjust to that diagnosis and what that's going to mean as you go through this neurodegenerative process, right? Which is inevitable and a terminal diagnosis as well. So there are all those different layers. And there I am in social work studies with my grandma in a very close relationship learning about this clinically in terms of our social services, our systems, and as a granddaughter. Seeing her struggle and have difficulty connecting with her husband in the way that she used to, and all of those relational elements. So I think my relationship with my grandma really motivated me to do something different than what I saw already. So these are the programs and services that already exist. Okay, we went out, we hustled, we tried to do our very best to find what we could that would work for them. And it wasn't enough. There are massive gaps that exist. And I think it was my love for her that really motivated me to push through any discomfort of, accepting what already exists and thinking, okay, this is good enough. And well, this just must be the way it is, to kind of push harder and look for something that would be suitable. Like, surely someone has got to have figured this out. This can't be what everyone does everywhere across the world. And they both passed away, Andy, right before I moved to do my master's in the same year. So I think that too, in
Sorry to hear that.
life course theory. Thank you. It was a lot. It was like 11 years ago now, more than that. But in life course theory and gerontology, they talk about this, the timing and sequence of events in your life. And when I learned about that, it was profound for me, where I thought, oh yeah, this is going to change the course of my life, kind of having those experiences with my grandparents before I moved to Toronto. And I'm not a caregiver for them anymore in that time. So I really use a lot of that momentum, that energy, and that connection with my grandparents to found green care farms to be something totally different and fill the gap of what my grandparents needed in its smallest form. I'd love to have tons of farms. I'd love to run huge care farms. I'd love to do that. But for me, what I needed to do is get the minimum viable product, the prototype, the proof of concept out the door, so that Canadians could see people with dementia on a farm and understand care farming in its most basic principle.
Your your grandparents resided in rural communities. Typically, when we look at all the support systems, at least the ones I'm aware of, they typically say, come on in. It happens in an urban hub. You go to a community
Yeah.
hall, you go to in some cases, a seniors complex, you go to a hospital, you go in these kind of things. What gaps were existing for your grandparents, knowing that they were rural and quite rural, it sounds like?
I mean, you just mentioned a lot of them, right? So accessing healthcare, like somebody who lives in the city, I mean, it depends what city, but you are looking at a commute to get to your appointments. But what's a reasonable commute? 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, an hour? If you're in a rural setting, you could probably safely double that for whatever it is that you're doing. So you've got that right off the hop for getting to any form of professional engagement where you need to travel to an office. But I think what I noticed with my grandparents, and I think from what I understand, it's even worse now than their experience, which is over a decade ago, was that it's difficult to have caregivers, and paid, unpaid, but especially paid caregiving, right? So the personal support hours they might get for respite. It's very difficult to find people that are willing to drive out. I hope that we've made improvements here, but at the time when my grandparents were going through this, they were not paid for their travel time. So they were just expected to drive farther and longer in order to get to a client, where if it's a contract competition environment, that contract doesn't look very desirable. So then the person who's living in a rural setting, they're experiencing even higher turnover in the people that are coming, and a less likelihood that their contracts are going to be picked up. And that is true whether they're paying privately or whether that is a public service arrangement, because they live farther.
And I've heard this firsthand from home care companies that they have a harder time, and there's less of them in these rural environments because they want to find the person local so they don't have to navigate that long drive.
Yeah.
But if you're talking a place that's 45 minutes or an hour from an urban hub, the amount of qualified healthcare people in there are going to be minimal, and those people probably are going to charge a little bit more. Like, they're going to ask for a little bit more in compensation because, there's only a handful of them. And that makes it harder to justify who's going to pay that. Right?
Totally. And I think there are some improvements, and there are some ideas around mobile health clinics, right? Or how can we have as many of these professionals at once kind of moving into locations for a day or two, or running the clinic for a week or a month. So people are working on it. I know that they're working on it. But just to bring it back to care farming, our vision is a care farm in every community in Canada. And I think that smaller, nodular kind of model really makes sense, so that if you have, I'll just pick it in its simplest form, day programs in every community that can reasonably support 10 people with dementia a day in the program, you run that 5 days a week, you're looking at 50 possible people with dementia in a rural setting that could be supported in this type of respite environment. That's huge. That's massive, whether that's one day a week or multiple days a week. And if you have that in every community that has agriculture or a rural sprawl around the urban, which is almost every city, right? Think
Hmm.
about the impact of that, not needing to go in, but instead we're traveling on the outskirts of the city. So we talk a lot about the hub and spoke, the hub and spoke, the hub and spoke, right? We've always got the hub, and then we have these little spokes that are outside. I guess this would be like the tire, the tire that goes around both the hub and the spoke, where you have little kind of nodes on the tire where you just have that small scale of service operation, 10 people at a time.
You're not a conventional, typical farmer. So how did you get from social work to green care farm? How did your background lead you into that approach? Because
Yeah.
the two typically aren't in the same silo, right?
I think actually too, and after talking about my experience with my grandparents, I think sometimes I wonder, how did I get away from farming? Like, what happened in Canada? Because my family were farmers. They were. My brother owns a farm, and he worked his butt off to get that farm. And that's the reality when it comes to people who want to be farmers in today's day and age. It's really hard to get back there. So that's kind of what I'm wondering about these days, is how did I get away from farming? Because I was there before. I am one generation removed, right? So if we had figured out how to make that economic model on the homestead, on the farm viable, there's a very good chance that I would still be there. But as a psychotherapist, social worker, I've always been interested in green thumb plants. I've always had a garden in my own backyards. I worked as like a landscaper when I was a teenager. So I feel like just a little bit outside of what would be a big, huge farmer. I think the other thing to mention, just the comparison or to draw a through line in this, is that in the Netherlands, you've got a lot of smaller farms. So these are farms that are sometimes 2, 5, 10 acres. Canada has really changed agriculturally over the last 50 years, big time. We used to have a lot more smaller farms. That's less common now. Now you've got farms that are going up to hundreds of thousands of acres, right? Cash crops with these massive, huge farms. The definition of farming has really had a lot of flexibility. So when you say, you're not a traditional farmer, I guess I'm kind of curious about, how would someone define a traditional farmer these days? And what's a traditional farmer? If you have an urban ag setup, you're a farmer. Are you a traditional farmer? I don't know. So I guess that's kind of what it makes me think of is, well, things have changed a lot. How did I get away from farming? And how are we defining traditional farmer? Because if traditional farmer means that you've got like 20,000 cattle, you're a verified, bona fide dairy farmer. You've got hundreds of thousands of acres of soybeans. Oh, you're for sure a farmer. But her, I don't know about her. She's got a vegetable garden on a
That's a
farm.
that's a fair question.
165-acre farm, though, Andrews is, but we don't farm at all.
That's a fair question. I mean, I think in my mind, when I think of what is a farmer, I would think about the man with the boots and the plaid shirt and the jeans that's going in a combine and doing
Yeah.
that. But at the same point, that's also not reflective of, your grandfather in a Christmas tree farm. If he took a combine through his Christmas trees, we would have issues. So
Yes, he would be very unhappy. Although stumps are a real issue. I think that's one thing we've learned. It's stumps. Anyways, and Christmas tree farming itself has changed a lot in terms of like what farming models are going to work. But I do think while we're on farming, I think something that's so important to me when it comes to green care farms, so that's the thought leadership that I'm behind in Canada, is the integrity of agriculture in the model. It's so important. We're having a real issue when it comes to keeping farmland as farmland, growing food. And so keeping the care farming tied to an operational farm is extremely important to me. And it's also the most critical therapeutic element. Blue skies, green fields, the smell that you smell when you're out in the country, the sounds of the birds or the tractors, the type of ambiance that people are soothed by, especially people who've been socialized or raised in agricultural settings. So it's critical.
what's the typical day-to-day look like for someone living with dementia that is in one of these respite programs with you?
Yeah, it totally depends what's happening at the farm, right? So when you think about, I'm confident you've been to farms in your life, and when you think about the season, a lot can change. So if you're coming on the farm in April, chances are things are brown, muddy, not super nice to look at. It's a little bit cold. You don't have a whole lot coming out of the ground, right? Maybe some crops that you planted last fall, but not that much. If you come to the farm, okay, so the tasks at that time would be more preparing the ground for planting. You're doing a lot of garden design or crop design. You're thinking about where do I want things to go? How did things go last year? Do I need to diversify any of the species that I'm going to be planting? Do I want to move anything in my structure setup? That's kind of what you're thinking about in the spring. How am I going to do this season, right? Then in the middle of the season, more June, July, that's where you get into a lot of, you have viable little baby plants that are coming up. You need to thin things out. You might need to move your crops around. You might have some that don't make it. You need to replant. You need to stagger your rows, like you're working on the maintenance within the garden itself. And you're also seeing how things have moved over the winter. So once you've got things that are coming up, you might find the alignment that you had on that one field over there is no good. You need to redo that. The road washed out over there. You need to redo that. You need tons and tons of mulch in this area because something sunk, right? The ground composition is constantly changing. Side note, people ask me a lot about paving or the surfaces in the farm, which we can talk about for fall prevention, that sort of thing. And that's one of the reasons why asphalt on a farm isn't always a good idea, because the ground shifts over the winter. Things change in the water composition. Anyways, later in the summer, you have things that start to get ready. August, September are always these like lush, gorgeous explosions of color on the farm because all of the crops except cherries are ready earlier in the year. Our everberry strawberries are ready earlier in the year. Some of the greens are ready earlier, but the bulk of the crops are ready in August and September. And so that is this wild frenzy of harvesting, and trying to get our bulk produce, our surplus produce out to the Food for Life food bank, which is where we do our donations. So all the things that I'm describing are things that we do in partnership with people with dementia. And that partnership depends on their level of ability, but more importantly, what they are interested in, what they would like to do. So I'll just kind of go over some of the activities that people in our program like to do this year. We had one woman who was very, very focused on shelling peas. So we had all kinds of beans and peas that were ready, and she would spend 1 or 2 hours a day just taking them out of their pods and putting them aside. And she was so good at it. We had another person who loved weeding, even thistles, which I totally can't stand. Most people can't stand. She was like immune to it. She was just like a little machine. And she was an incredible weeder, gardener, we love all the people in our program. Another person who was not as interested in the manual labor, but really liked to watch the chickens, really liked to interact with the goats, really liked to kind of check in on the guys over there, which are the animals. So a lot of spent time in animal approximation, egg collection, that sort of thing. And we had another person who was interested more in building structures, right? So you've got a lot of people who are hobbyists or handy people, and they like to build things, fix things, take things apart. And someone with dementia can still do that. They just might need a little bit of help. They might need a little bit of help finding the right tool, or, if they forget what they're doing in the middle of their activities, some redirection. Anyways, I'm rambling, but there's so many things that we do. Like everything that you do on a functional farm, we do that with people with dementia. It just changes all the time.
I would assume if someone wants to go along and help you, there's volunteer opportunities and stuff for somebody that lives in a nearby adjacent community that says, Rebekah, I love it. Can I contribute? I would suspect that there's some sort of opportunities like that.
Yeah, the work is never done. It is never done. It's one of those, I think people who are listening have probably heard of the flow state. A lot of entrepreneurs or people who are doing innovative things, they've heard of the flow state. We all like to be busy and we all like to do things. And my grandpa used to say, everyone needs to be needed, everyone needs to be loved. And so the need to be needed is so important. So people who want to do things include people with dementia. So I'll get back to the volunteer thing in just a sec. But one thing that I explain to new members is I let them know, hey, we need help on our farm here. These are the things that we have going on. I heard you're retired. Do you think you have some time that you could spend with us? Which is so important because my pitch isn't, hey, you have a cognitive impairment. I heard about that, whether or not you have insight to it. Anosognosia, lack of insight to one's own condition, right? I'm not going to start by telling them, hey, I've got a program for your illness. Nobody likes that. Very few people like that. I start by asking them, I heard you're skilled. You've got some time. I could really use some support or some help. Do you have some time? And that seems to work quite well. And then they're kind of part of our club and we go from there. But for people who are not part of the program, who are interested in volunteering or spending time on the farm, we have something called community days. And so that is once a month where we do a lot of the heavy lifting, the manual labor, some of the bigger tasks that we maybe don't get done in a day program. We work on those things. And so those opportunities are on our website. I also have a core team, which is an amazing group of people who help me a lot with the back end. our website, our newsletter, our social media channels, and our strategy and planning.
How have you seen a shift in the mindset of the folks that are members? What sort of impact have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really an interesting thought just around a mindset and cognitive impairment in general, right? A neurodegenerative disorder. So I'll just talk about what I observe more in affect, because I think that to me is a more promising indicator of their experience than their mindset. The reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people with dementia present with apathy or what is the perception of apathy, which looks a lot like depression, right? I don't want to, I don't care. And when we dig deep into why they might be feeling those things or sharing those things, it could be because they're confused, they're not sure about where they are or who they're with, or what's going on in the environment around them. Disorientation, right? That's super, super common in dementia. So, what I see in a typical program day is that if people arrive to the farm and they may be feeling, I don't really want to be here. Where am I? How come you're taking me here? Why aren't you staying with me? Those are very common things that I think a lot of caregivers can relate to, right? Is don't leave me. I want to go with you. You stay with me. Those are really, really common exchanges that happen in that kind of care dynamic. So those happen for us too. But what I notice is at the end of the day, by a couple hours into it or even 1 hour into it, they're not saying that anymore for sure. They're engaged, they're having a good time, they're doing something, they're having that relationship. Sometimes we see some of that recall come back. Like folks will say, "I've been here before." I say, "Yeah, I'm so glad you can come back. So glad to see you again." Right? So there's some of that sort of I would, memory, but recall. There's some recall there. By the end of the day, almost every single member is saying, "I love you guys. I love you girls. I can't wait to come back. I had such a good day. Thank you so much." They love their flower crowns, their vegetables, the different things that we do during the day. There's a total shift in how they're feeling, right? So you asked about mindset, and I think mindset is a little bit cerebral for me. It's a little bit maybe inaccessible to somebody who's got a moderate to severe progression of a neurodegeneration. A mindset is a bit of a choice. Affect, how you're feeling. I see that shift remarkably in everybody in our program over the course of the day. The other thing is I see a lot of physical improvements and at least, if not gains, I see maintenance. I see sustainability of their physical impairment. So to give you an example, one of the guys in our program, 86-year-old man, amazing sense of humor, awesome. Mobility, not so great. And a lot of reluctance or unwillingness to ambulate at home. And I totally get that, having observed it, been through it myself. Sometimes the primary care provider, caregiver, isn't the person that can motivate their person with dementia to do something different than they want to do or that they do every other day. So I get it. Long story short, he's not really walking a lot at home. So he's deconditioning. He's losing a lot of muscle. He's losing a lot of that tone in his body, which means that he's losing his mobility slowly but surely. So when I went and did the intake and assessment for this person, talking about the program, I asked him, "How is that going walking?" He gave me a realistic perspective, not fantastic. We talked about, how would you feel being in a wheelchair someday? Not good. I don't want it. I said, "Okay, like, what are you working towards to prevent that?" Not a whole lot, right? At least when we look at what's actually happening. So his agreement was, "I'm going to come onto the farm and I want to walk. I want to walk every day." Was he happy about that at the beginning of the day? No. But each time I reminded him, "Hey, when I met you, your goal was to keep walking and keep out of a wheelchair." And he would say, "Yes." I tell him, "I'm so proud of you. This is great. You're doing awesome." And we saw him improve over the course of the summer, even with just that kind of minor intervention in the whole scape of physio or kinesiology, right? That's kind of a minor intervention, but it was a massive impact to this person's life.
If we want to apply this across the country, what changes are needed at a provincial and or national level to make this more viable and more likely to happen?
I could have flipped that a tiny bit because I think it's a lot more on the individual and community level. Look, we rely on our nation and our province, right? Federal, provincial governments to do a whole lot. I think sometimes we need to ask a little bit more of the individual citizen when it comes to breaking out of what you're used to, breaking out of what you're comfortable with, doing something a little unconventional. I think you can probably relate to that, Dee, because of what you do. And so, sure, there are recommendations that I could suggest in terms of federal and provincial. Some of them come to the concepts of accreditation. What would an accredited model of care farming look like, such as we have in that? That's something we could talk about. Regulation. What kind of regulatory framework do we need for care farming that would be able to be applied over these different populations that we talk about? And that's where I see the role of governments is in those two kind of modes, most importantly, as well as kind of a third tier on that, supporting the economic viability for farmers and the relationship between a qualified professional to run a care farm and an agricultural contributor in our society, right? That's tricky. Those are sometimes one person, but more than often they're two different types of people. So we could use some economic support to kind of tie those two together. That's what I see as the role of provincial and federal. But I think on a community and individual level, we need to be asking for these types of models of care. We need to be looking for them. And we need to understand that they can happen with people like me, people like you, everyday people, and not somewhere else in a different country just because they live in a different country. I think that's quite a limiting thought perspective.
So you mentioned that it comes down to the individual. What would it take to have your vision of a green care farm in every community happen, knowing that not all of us are farmers? A lot of us live in urban hubs and we don't necessarily spend a ton of time in rural communities, but we see value in it. So what would it take to achieve that vision?
It's funny. My partner's in technology, and so we talk a lot about the usefulness of technology in all kinds of different ways, right? I think more important than ever right now is the value of relationship, human connection, conversation, generational learning, those types of aspects. That is critical. I think more than ever, we need to be open to the ideas and contributions and interests and efforts of other people because you're not going to do it alone. You're not going to do it through Chat GPT. So if you're interested, I mean, you might have some ideas, which he has shown me, and that's true. But you're going to be able to do something like a care farming you know, piece. It doesn't have to be a full-blown program. You might start with an info session or a workshop or just a little, stakeholder meeting. Who's interested in this? Do we know what it is? Are we agreeing on the definition of what it is? What are we talking about here? Everybody wants a better place to grow old and for people with dementia. So that's where you could start with that sort of conversation and really kind of get an idea of who's in your corner, who's also interested in this. And then we have to be a little bit uncomfortable working with other people in order to flesh this out fully. It comes before anything else. It comes before any type of amazing business plan, any type of, well, I shouldn't say it comes before those things. Those things are important too, but you can do those things for free right now without any sort of backing. You can start to have those conversations and get a pulse for the appetite in your community, or whether it's your professional community, your geographic community. Try to get a feel for who else is interested in this. Because from those connections, people get a little bit more brave. They get a little bit more courageous. When you're accountable to someone else, speaking for myself, I'm more likely to do something than if I'm just accountable to myself. So I think especially in this day and age, more important than ever, we need some of that interdependence. I'm sure that people have covered this in your podcast around the interdependent kind of dynamic in caregiving. And I think this is a little bit of a macro implementation of interdependence, that we need each other to be able to develop community solutions like this. So I think, yeah, for the appetite for care farming that happen in that nodular level on the tire of the hub and spoke model, if you will, in the country, in rural areas, people in rural settings are actually a lot better at this than people in urban settings, having these conversations, noticing if so-and-so's home or not, so-and-so's wife is in the hospital, how's that going? So what if part of those beautiful neighborly conversations were also, have you heard of a care farm? What do you think about that? Well, so-and-so is this type of farm. Maybe they could do it there. I don't know about my chicken farm. Kind of smells. That's what I think. I think it needs to happen on an individual and community level first, because I've worked for many levels of government. It doesn't just happen because someone in the government thinks it's a good idea. And if it does, you may not have the traction, the public appetite, probably not the money that you need to have a meaningful change in the social fabric of a country, right?
So you mentioned earlier on that a lot of the, maybe not a lot, but some of the harvest is donated to the food bank. How do you see care farming supporting not just dementia care, but also rural revitalization and food security?
I think one of the most important aspects is that it provides an income diversification for the farmer, right? It's so hard to stay in farming and food production. That is extremely difficult for almost every farmer out there. So by adding a care farm element onto it, you're opening up the opportunity to have a market front that has products or fresh goods that have a little kind of sticker that says, your tomato was grown in support with a person with dementia. How cool is that? Kind of marrying the concept, the social purpose with the product or service that you're already selling. We'll sticker on your milk, if you will. Any type of operational farm can be a care farm. Just throwing that part in there. So it's just adding a social and community-based element to the products or services that a farm is already working on. It's keeping farmland, farming, and it's also a little bit of a nod to generations before us that have worked so hard to build that agricultural sector, which I think is so important, right? Instead of people thinking, oh, you know what, we're just gonna have to sell the farm. We can't, and that is what my family did. So no blame or shame there. Hey, it happens. But I'm wondering if there are other ways to look at how we can keep farmland as farmland, keep people farming. That in itself, you're looking at a local economy. You're looking at the food to table diet, supporting farmers markets, right? All of those things come after. So that's a bit more of a structural piece. But on an individual level, you can still have a lot of those products and services that you're doing already as a farmer, adding in that social responsibility piece to it. And then you're producing more food, which is local. So for us, what we do, each farm is different. Our satellite location, Meaford Green Care Farms, they have a similar setup where they're donating their excess produce. So all of the people in our program go home with some produce from the program. So they take produce home anyways, like from the program. And then there's also a market front on the farm where we sell stuff. But our excess produce gets donated to Food for Life Food Bank, which is a food redistribution. And in Meaford Green Care Farms, they have something extremely similar. I don't know what their setup is, but I know that Food for Life in Milton, what they do is they make packages for isolated seniors. So mostly homebound seniors that live at home. So that means the stuff that we grow in our program, some of it gets to the table of a homebound senior who can't maybe make it to the farm. And I love that. But I think it's important when people are trying to see themselves in this, people are going to listen and, oh, can I have a care? Oh, I can't because I can't do that, or I can't because I can't do that. You don't have to donate your produce there, no matter which way the food is consumed. So long as it is consumed, it is contributing to a local economy. So, because it's taken away from big corporate grocery store purchases, et cetera, et cetera.
How has building this green care farm changed you professionally and personally?
It's funny. I filled out a application for something the other day and it just said, what's your biggest challenge? And I was honest, and I'll be honest with you, where, I am not the mother I would be if I wasn't a business owner. I'm not the wife I would be if I wasn't a business owner. And I'm sure being a business owner has changed me in many wonderful ways too, where I think about, I don't feel as limited by a lot of things that I think other people feel limited by because I'm in the arena. So Brene Brown has a quote. I don't know if you've heard it before. It's, if you're not in the arena getting your butt kicked, I'm not interested in your opinion. I'm a little bit more people pleasing than that. I'm still interested in the opinion and I'll figure out what I'll do with it. But I think that that's such an important and compelling quote for thinking about what it takes to put yourself out there. And I am a sensitive person. I'm very curious about other people as well. I like other people. I want to know what they think. I want to know what they're interested in. And so it's been something as a business owner to put out a private program, which as a social worker, I never, ever would thought that I would do. I wouldn't believe you if you told me I was going to have a business. I would say, no, you're wrong. I'm not going to do that. That's a sellout option. And here I am trying to replicate the economic model of the Dutch care farming as a business, a social enterprise, which is what they do in the Netherlands. How has it changed me? I mean, it's definitely made me, I think, a bit braver. It's made me a bit stronger in some of my convictions for what we need. I work otherwise in clinical geriatrics, and, I'm not convinced in what I see day to day there that they've got it all figured out. They don't. And they're certainly not working much on prevention or some of that health and wellness within the caregiving dynamic, which we support in our program. We're a soft place to land for people. I'm an entry point for people to share some of the distresses of caregiving. And then I have ideas, right? Have you talked to someone about that? Do you know about this program with the Alzheimer's Society? Do you know about this hotline that you can talk to? Or if you just want to talk to me about how you're doing, that's okay too. It's another kind of point of contact for them. It has changed me a lot. I mean, I felt personally responsible to do something, and I explained some of those motivations around the grief and the dynamics of my family. I can't put it back down, and I don't think I would, but each stage of development as an entrepreneur challenges me in a different way. challenges me in a different way. I'm not shaking in my boots at some things anymore, but I'm still learning. I'm still at the creative edge, if you will, of my capacities. My golly, am I ever challenged by the technology component? I'm sure I'm not the only entrepreneur that's like, how come I have to know every single tech system all the time in order to lead? But you do. So that's always a learning curve for me.
100%. Never thought that I would have to know, how to do QuickBooks and these
Yes,
sort of things.
it's you. It's me.
Who
It's
would have
us.
guessed?
Yeah, no. Even the whole delegation, hire someone else. You get someone to do the things you don't like to do. Well, who's going to oversee them? You
I
have to
mean, an
understand
MBA
it.
taught me how to fill in QuickBooks.
There you go. Yeah.
What gives you hope when you look at the future of dementia care in Canada?
I was talking before about that individual and community level. And so in the last couple of years, we put out, because I get so many inquiries, how do I start a care farm? How do I do this? I want to do a care farm. I have a farm. I have a person with dementia. Flood of it. And I was that person. I was that person before, right? Reaching out to professionals in other countries and trying to find who I could talk to. And so I want to be able to give them something, those people who are curious like that and interested. So we worked on developing a course, how to start a care farm, and have run 2 cohorts of that. And we're working on developing that into a more robust and thorough system of education and learning. That's kind of one of our strategic pillars right now that we're working. But in those courses, I have met just some absolutely beautiful, intelligent, driven, inspired people. And that is 100% what keeps me going at this point. So I think the development of the care farm that I run, yeah, that's important. But when it comes to how I'm spending my time, 50% of it goes to the operations of the day program that I run, and 50% of it goes in investing in other people who want to do this and who are looking to see themselves in what I'm doing. So that is what is motivating for me, is meeting people who are like, Jess and John are a great example. They're so smart. They're educated. They own property. Like, they're amazing people, but they weren't sure. They had a gorgeous family story. John's mom lived with dementia. They wanted to do something different than what his family went through. And they did it. They have an incredible care farm, and anybody who lives in Grey County or Bruce County should go see it. And it was because they needed a little help. They needed, well, more than a little help. They needed all the forms and the administration and, the support. But that is totally what keeps me motivated. And what I think is the future for us is more of those, more people who think, hey, maybe I can. And just because you decide that you can for a bit, it doesn't mean that you have to forever. I'm a project manager. I'm a big believer in start and stop. I'm a big believer in iteration and incrementalism, all of those things. And so part of my support with those folks is helping them understand what their big idea, big vision is in a bite-sized way.
And so on the other side, for caregivers that feel overwhelmed, what do you want them to take away about the healing restorative power of being in nature?
First of all, you're doing a really good job. I think so many caregivers, well, you too, Andy, but caregivers, they need to hear that they're doing a good job. I don't think they hear that nearly enough. They hear how much they need to do differently or better, or the options they could do out there. The reality is we don't have any disease-modifying medical treatments for dementia, and we need to do such a better job at supporting the relationship and just the role that those folks are stepping into. It's incredible and extraordinary. So they need to hear that they're doing a good job, because they are. I think my best thing to communicate to caregivers about the benefits of nature or being immersed in nature would not be verbal. I would just probably hold their hand and take them for a walk in the apple orchard and just encourage them to pay attention to their senses for 2 whole minutes. None of me talking. As you've experienced today, I can talk, but that's not always what we need. Sometimes we just need to sit with our senses, enjoy our environment, and have those mindful, meditative moments immersed in nature. That is the beauty of it. So I don't think I would tell them. I think I would show them.
Let's get into a new segment that I'm doing called
Okay.
Lightning Round. I want to
Yeah.
ask you some questions, short, maybe 1 word, 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences, but I want to hear kind of quickly off the cuff what your thoughts are on these things. A
Sure.
moment on the farm you'll never forget.
I think a woman who was an ECE holding my son and just watching her face exploded joy.
Your favorite sound on the farm.
Laughter.
1 word that describes what care means to you.
Love.
A lesson that the land has taught you that a classroom never could.
Time heals. There's a new season.
When you need grounding, what's your go-to place or ritual or thing to do on the farm?
Weeding.
A misconception about dementia that you wish everyone would just let go of.
speaking louder can help someone understand. That's just ridiculous, people. It's a sensory processing disorder a lot of the times. What are we doing? I just really
That's funny.
wish so many clinicians could get past that.
That's funny. Finish this sentence. The future of dementia care in Canada will be.
Future of dementia, or say that again. Say that again. I want to make sure I do it right.
Yeah, the future of dementia care in Canada will be.
Critical, one way or another. Critical. You didn't say care farming, you said dementia care. So it's going to be really, really critical what we do with this.
The song or sound you'd play to open a new care farm. When it opens up, the banner comes down, it's open. What song would play or sound?
The first
Whatever
one
it
that
is.
came to mind is We Are the Champions.
Hey, good. I'm all on board for that. The best advice a farmer has ever given you.
Don't worry about that so much. Not so much planning, maybe. Not so many documents, Rebekah.
That's the thing, right? As farmers are very much of go with the flow, right? You never know what's going to come next month. Just go with it. Fair enough. The biggest surprise about running a farm for people living with dementia.
How people think I have to be this bona fide farmer. I'm like, why? If I wasn't a geriatric clinician, they wouldn't trust me either. It's interesting.
How about a quote, mantra, or verse you come back to when things get hard?
My grandma's head is in my head a lot when my grandma's voice is in my head a lot when I'm doing things and she would just always say, you got this, sweetie. Don't worry. Who cares what they say? Those sorts of things. So that always kind of comes back. I think I bit off more than I can chew. You're fabulous. Just go for it. It's very motivating.
Finally, what's the first thing you want listeners to picture when they hear the words green care farm?
Blue skies and green fields and whoever it is that they love with dementia in that setting. Peaceful.
Yeah, that's profound, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be something simple to connect with them and get them doing something.
They just need to be welcome. They just need to be welcome in the space. And that's where our job comes in.
Well, Rebekah, that's what we have for time today. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to talk to you about green care farms and the idea of let's get our loved ones into nature and connection and community. I appreciate your time so far.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
To our listeners, thank you for being here. If today's conversation resonated with you, follow the Dementia Collective wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to share this episode with someone who might benefit from listening. And if you'd like to help us grow this movement, please consider becoming a member of the Village on Patreon. Among other benefits, you get early access to every single episode, plus the satisfaction of hearing powerful voices like Rebekah's reach more caregivers around the world. And finally, if you're on your own caregiving journey, remember, you are not alone. We're here at BlueBell to help connect you with supports and resources that truly fit your family's unique and individual needs. Until next time, remember, you are strong, you are not alone, and you are doing something that matters more than you know. Thank you.